single day, like I've always done and always will.
Passing these bills on the floor, making yet another stand.
Welcome to this week's edition of New York Now. I'm Chantel Destra. This year's state budget provided over $400 million to invest in the city of Albany. The money will be split between several capital projects, including renovations for the State Museum, revitalizing the downtown area, and reconnecting communities. Supporters say that it was important for both the governor and the legislature to finally invest in the city because it is the state's capital. Lawmakers who represent Albany have positioned this as a once-in-a-generation investment that could make the city unrecognizable. In this next segment, we'll hear from State Senator Patricia Fahy, who represents the area, to understand the funding and its impact. Here's that conversation. Thank you so much for joining us here today, Senator.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Now, the state budget provided over $400 million in funding to invest in the city of Albany. Can you give us a breakdown of how that money will be spent and why it was important to invest in the city this year?
First of all, this was a jaw-dropping, once-in-a-lifetime amount of money. Very, very grateful to the governor for this investment. I mean, this back in January on the State of the State, we knew we were making some headway on the museum. We've spent many years advocating to redo the museum. We knew we were pushing for downtown revitalization. So I kind of thought we were getting some big numbers. I had no idea it would be $400 million. So of that $400 million, $200 million, half of it, is going toward downtown revitalization efforts, all within 1 mile of the Capitol. The second part is $150 million for the State Museum to really build a world-class museum. Many people know that I think it's 9 years now that I've been advocating for a children's science museum and revitalization of what has been a very stale museum. So this is a game changer in terms of museums as well, and really overdue. So not just the State Museum, but I'm really hoping for a vibrant children's part of that, especially on the 4th floor of where the State Museum is now. So that's two. Third part is 787. And I'm so pleased, particularly on this one with the governor. It was a little bit lonely a half dozen years ago when I started talking about this and got laughed at by a few people because in the end, we will need multiple billions of dollars from the federal government when you really start removing parts of a highway. But you either spend hundreds of millions on upkeep or you begin to take some of it down, repurpose, reimagine some of it. So right now we have $35 million for the next phase to begin to build those feasibility studies, really do the thorough utility analysis of what's under, what's doable. And as I've said, I want to see us go over it in parts, where you go over it with a parkland, go under it with the canals. Remember, we have the original Lock 1 of the Erie Canal right here. Many proposals as well to go right in front of SUNY Central at the bottom of State Street there. So lots of great things to, again, go over it with parkland, under it with a canal, and then take down as much as possible. So that's $35 million. Then, again, due to the governor's generosity, we were able to secure capital funding for the city of Albany. Those are operating dollars. And this year, we were able to increase that to $20 million. There's $1 million in there for public safety because that matters on anything we do. So in rough numbers, we're actually a little over $400 million. And it's going to take a while with that downtown revitalization, but it's nothing short of extraordinary, and again, a once-in-a-generation opportunity.
And as the state senator representing this area, what was the reaction from some of your constituents when they heard about this funding in the budget?
We've been building this, right? For years, we've been advocating on revitalizing Albany. A huge shout out to Mayor Sheehan for work on whether we do a soccer stadium on what is considered the downtown parking lot district, which was for years proposed to be a convention center. That convention center moved up off Eagle Street, the convention center we have now, much smaller scale. So we still have this parking lot district, which is a complete eyesore. The governor, I think, really recognized downtown was hurting, particularly since COVID, when state workers, which had been our primary industry here, was the state workforce, they are largely working from home, and it's really hurt. So you had this eyesore of, again, what's called a parking lot district, 8 acres there, sitting empty. Lots of needs with state office buildings that are, in some cases, half empty. And it's fueled some of the public safety concerns that we all take very, very seriously and we have struggled to address. So the idea of really investing, converting some of these office buildings to apartments, condos, and more, and all of this can really move toward revitalization efforts, including the possibility of a soccer stadium, which is a very serious proposal. Now we can go to the next level on that and make sure that if we are moving forward on this investment, it's going to work for Albany, not just tomorrow, but for years to come. So there's a lot of exciting proposals out there. You start to combine that with let's say a soccer stadium, with taking down parts of 787, reclaiming our waterfront. Where we were really harmed in the 1960s is by cutting off Albany from our greatest natural resource, and that's the mighty Hudson River. So you had an overbuilt highway. Even in the 1960s, it was overbuilt, even more overbuilt now, highly underutilized. So we take down part of that, maybe bring in a stadium, repurpose some of these office buildings. You really start a new museum, more parkland with going over and under 787 with parkland canals and more. And I'm hoping we will barely recognize Albany the way it is right now in 10 years, because it will be a totally different city. I'm very optimistic and, again, deeply grateful to the governor. This is, we've seen this governor and previous governors invest with the Buffalo Billion and more into Buffalo. We've seen Rochester investments with the Rock River. We're seeing a big investment in Syracuse with taking down parts of I-81 there. So if you keep coming east, it was Albany's turn.
And as you mentioned, $150 million of that funding will go towards renovating and modernizing the State Museum. It was also reported that Governor Kathy Hochul made a visit to the State Museum with her granddaughter that was a bit lackluster, and that was sort of the impetus of her pushing to get renovation on the State Museum. What do you think of that being sort of the catalyst for this idea?
I think it really helped. And by the way, I've heard this from Assembly members for years. I've been back to the State Museum with a couple of children I mentor, and it hadn't changed much since my children had been there 20 years ago. So, and that's why I'm not trying to, I know I've offended a couple of people, but there's no offense intended. It's stale, it's old, and it needs real revitalization. We know the Children's Museum in Indianapolis is the single largest tourist attraction in the entire state of Indiana, other than their sports venues. So we know when you invest, when you make something vibrant, creative, it can really be a destination point. We are the upstate, we're New York, right? We are just 2.5 hours upstate from the cultural capital of the universe, right? New York City, by most accounts, is really the cultural capital of the universe. There's no reason why we can't celebrate our extraordinary history, and you do that with our cultural institutions, in this case, the State Museum. So yes, if it took the governor's granddaughter to help push the impetus for this, I'm grateful not just to the governor, but to her granddaughter.
And we know there is also about $200 million in funding going to downtown revitalization. There are a lot of empty storefronts along North Pearl and Broadway. How will the funding help to address that and also incentivize new business owners to make Albany their home?
Well, the 200 million, there's going to be groups involved in this, working groups. I really want to make sure many of the neighborhood and community groups are involved in these conversations. So it's not just that downtown corridor along Broadway and Pearl. It's also further out, such that we address the 1 mile includes downtown Central Avenue, the Central Avenue bid, which is also tired, worn. Lots of problems there from when we had the methadone clinic there, which we were successful in moving just in this last year. We also have Lincoln Towers right off Morton Avenue. So we've got to have a little bit of a plan here, not just for converting these downtown office buildings. We still need state workers back, but we also need to invest in these businesses. Small businesses are really the lifeblood of our upstate economy. In some ways, they're the lifeblood of our economy, period, right? So we need to make sure that we are investing in those businesses. I was just at a ribbon cutting on signage. Signage matters, investing in them, making sure that we are addressing public safety, parking issues, and more. The bike lanes, the pedestrian safe walking paths, all of that will feed in. But the soccer stadium is one we're going to be looking at very seriously. There's some very fascinating plans that have been drawn up on that. And obviously, it can't be just about soccer. It would have to be a very multi-use stadium. The part I'm most interested in is the housing tied to that. So I tell people a lot, I may not know a lot about soccer, but I know a lot about housing. And if it comes with 1,000 housing units, apartments, condos, townhouses, and more, that's what's going to do the vibrancy. Soccer is great, but we need to make sure there's going to be 100 nights book there. So it's not just something where it's 14 games in a season. We need a multi-purpose, multi-use stadium if that's what it's going to take to drive, let's say, an additional 1,000 housing units. So there's a lot of work to be done here. All of these have tremendous potential. We need to make sure they fit together, and that while we're focused on the core of downtown, we're not ignoring Morton Avenue with a plan, at least a plan for the Lincoln Towers, a plan for the downtown Central Avenue. So I think we can walk and chew gum, and really, even if the funding stretches only so far, it can include a plan of how we make one piece of this build upon another.
And what will be your role in ensuring that the money is implemented correctly and not wasted with all of these different projects?
Well, it is money that we have allocated in the legislature, so we will be very mindful. I've pushed some of these issues for, as I said, a museum for 10 years, for reimagining 787 for at least 6 years. I'm not letting go. I hope to be intimately involved, but I also want to bring the community groups. We have a new mayor that will be incoming, very exciting. The new mayor here in Albany. We want to include all of those groups. Lots of great things happening at St. Rose, where I did the legislation on that, working with the county. So the county exec is also making some critical investments there. So we've got to, none of this happens without critical partnerships. I've already sat down with ESD, the Empire State Development Corporation, that is at the lead in all of this. They're going to be hiring the consultants and doing the feasibility studies and creating the master plan on this. Myself and my assembly colleagues have already sat down, and we're just beginning that next level of conversation. But again, we need the community groups, especially those groups that have historically been disadvantaged, right? So there is a social justice piece of this as well, especially when you're talking about the South End. So I'm there to also make sure that we make this a broad plan, even if it's multi-years. So the money will only go so far, but if it's a multi-year plan, to make sure that we are reaching into our communities that have also paid the price, for instance, from being cut off from our greatest natural resource, the South End in particular, and I do meet with them regularly.
Well, thank you so much for joining us here today, Senator.
Thank you for having me. Such an exciting topic.
And we were speaking with State Senator Patricia Fahy. Now turning to another important topic. The State Division of Human Rights is responsible for protecting the rights of New Yorkers against discrimination, injustice, and promoting equal access. We sat down with the newly appointed Commissioner, Denise Miranda, to understand her vision for the office and their work. Here's that conversation. Thank you so much for joining us here today, Commissioner.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Of course. Now, as the newly confirmed Commissioner of the State Division of Human Rights, can you tell us a bit about your plans for the office and your approach to the work?
Sure. So as you may know, I was appointed in March of 2024 by Governor Kathy Hochul with the expectation of modernizing and revitalizing the Division of Human Rights. Division of Human Rights celebrated our 80th anniversary this year. We are a nation-leading agency, and New York was actually the first state in the country to enact a human rights and civil rights law. So it is a very proud moment for me to serve as the commissioner here of New York State. Since arriving, we have taken that mandate very seriously to make sure that we are modernizing and revitalizing the agency. And we really have taken a wholesale approach at evaluating all elements of our operations and our customer service experience for New Yorkers.
And can you break down the jurisdiction of your department?
Sure. So we focus on 4 different areas of life here in New York. That would be education, employment, housing, and public accommodation. And there are more close to 19 protected classes here in New York, right, which include national origin, race, ethnicity, gender, sexual expression and orientation. So New York has a very rich history here of being a state that is progressive in its values in offering protections against discrimination.
Are there any specific types of discrimination cases that may fall outside of your jurisdiction that you're hoping to start working on?
The division is constantly looking at trends, right, in the space of New Yorkers and identifying areas where perhaps we may look to expand our jurisdiction. Just this past year, there have been discussions and legislation regarding appraisal discrimination, for example. We know that there is a history of appraisal discrimination where communities of color are disparately impacted by the fact that their properties are often undervalued. And so the division is very proud to, again, make that part of our portfolio of work.
And what are the agency's current methods for enforcing human rights laws in the state?
Sure. So as you may know, we prosecute, adjudicate cases here, and of course, investigate those cases. We receive approximately 7,000 to 8,000 cases every single year. We have a team of investigators. I'm very proud to share that this past year, we've added 50 investigators to our team. When I arrived here at the agency, our staffing was approximately 165. By the end of the year, we will probably be close to 280 staff members. So there have been very robust investments made here, which have allowed us to really make some changes that I think are really going to further the mission and support the operations here and provide for a better experience for New Yorkers.
And for our viewers who may not be familiar, what is the process for filing a complaint with the division?
So I'm excited for that particular question because we are actually in the process of launching a new intake model. So previously, when I arrived here at the agency, there were a host and myriad of ways in which a complaint could get filed. We counted over 13 different ways in which one could file a complaint of discrimination here at the New York State Division of Human Rights. We realized that that is not efficient, and it really leaves us open for misunderstandings or lack of information and transparency with respect to the process. So we have revamped our intake process, And we now have a centralized intake unit that will look at all of the cases coming in. We have modernized and updated our online form. I think the most important and exciting piece of news that I want to share today is the call center, which will launch approximately in the next 10 days. And that will be a dedicated call center that will allow for New Yorkers to call and speak with a human being who will be able to guide them in the process and provide them with the guidance of what they need in order to file a complete case here at the Division of Human Rights. So as we talk about, easing the process for New Yorkers, right, who are reaching out to us in a time of need because they have perhaps experienced an allegation of discrimination, making sure that they have the ability to connect with a human being who can walk them through the process, who can explain exactly what paperwork needs to be submitted, is really essential in ensuring that New Yorkers are being met effectively and providing them with good service.
And as you mentioned a little earlier, the department, of course, is celebrating 80 years since it was first founded. So can you unpack the impact of that anniversary? What place does it have in New York State's history?
I think given the political movement and what we're seeing, the vitriol coming from the federal administration, that anniversary has more significance than ever, right? And it's part of the reason why the ability to modernize and revitalize the agency, as well as make sure as we're doing outreach and education to New Yorkers, is particularly important. I think we realize that the political climate right now does not foster inclusivity or equity. And so the role of the division is to make sure that we are the guardrails to safeguard those very important values that we all share here in New York.
Yeah, as you mentioned, of course, in recent years, there's definitely been increased conversation around extreme political rhetoric. So how does that really impact the work that your office is doing?
We have a hate and bias prevention unit, which is housed here at the Division of Human Rights since 2022, created by this governor. And the work there is focused on ensuring that New Yorkers who experience an incident of hate or bias have a place where they can make those reports. So what we're seeing is that the discourse, right, which, is often fueled with rhetoric that can be hate and bias and racist in nature, there is a place where people can come here in the Division of Human Rights and file a complaint. We launched a campaign earlier this year that was on the MCA as well as the subways in Metro North and LIR, asking New Yorkers to report incidents of hate and bias to us. This is important because it informs our outreach efforts as well as our policy determinations. It's important for New Yorkers to know that hate and bias incidents will not be tolerated here in New York.
And is that campaign the No Hate New York State campaign? And if so, what are some of the goals that you're hoping to achieve with this initiative? And what is some of the progress that's been made so far on that front?
That is part of the No Hate New York, our work here, which is part of the Division of Human Rights. What we want to do is make sure that we can reach out to New Yorkers with prevention, education, as well as resolution models when we're seeing an uptick. We realize that, we have seen an uptick in incidents of hate and bias. Anti-Semitism is on the rise, as well as Islamophobia. We want to make sure that we are able to send our team out to those communities. We're able to offer conflict resolution or conciliation or even work with educators in that community. Our goal is to make sure that, again, we can contribute right to the fabric of New Yorkers so that they can live a life without hate and bias in their daily lives.
And can you unpack some of the specific challenges with human rights work, and how does your office mitigate these challenges?
I think the message that's coming from Washington, D.C. creates a lot of confusion and anxiety for people, right? And we're seeing that executive orders are being signed by this federal administration, and they suggest sweeping changes, right? And I think we're constantly working to ensure that New Yorkers know that despite these executive orders, the protections that exist in New York are sound and in place and have not changed. So our outreach and education work is particularly important. And it's an area where we've made significant investment in terms of staffing, as well as, community engagement.
And in terms of resources, what type of state funding is needed to support the work of your office?
So very proud of the fact that the governor made significant investment at the Division of Human Rights since she has taken office. Our budget has nearly doubled. Last year, we saw a 40% increase in our funding, which brings us close to nearly $40 million, which is unprecedented for us here at the Division of Human Rights. With that investment, we're able to really implement some of the institutional change and infrastructure investments, as well as staffing and, of course, the engagement, which I spoke about earlier.
And lastly, how would you say New York stacks up against other states in prioritizing human rights work? And how would you like to see the state grow in the years to come?
Well, I think the investment by the governor speaks volumes as to the priority that this administration has in preserving civil rights and human rights laws here. And I would like to believe that New York is a leader in that conversation. We're well poised as the first state in the nation to actually have a civil rights, to be a leader in those discussions. And we often collaborate and partner with other states when we're talking about policy changes and impact of federal laws.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Commissioner. We really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
And we were speaking with Denise Miranda, Commissioner of the New York State Division of Human Rights. And for more on the Division of Human Rights, you can visit our website. Again, that's at nynow.org. Well, that does it for this edition of New York Now. Thank you for tuning in, and see you next week.
Funding for New York Now is provided by WNET,